Story 1. The Unseen Eyes Next Door. The summer sun hung heavy over the sleepy suburban street where Daniel, his wife Carol, and their 6-year-old twins, Sam and Robbie, called home. Their corner lot, a modest but cherished house where they'd built their family, had been a sanctuary for 4 years. It was the place where Daniel and Carol exchanged vows in the backyard under a canopy of stars, where the twins took their first wobbly steps, and where laughter once echoed freely. But over time, the neighborhood had begun to shift, slowly, insidiously, like a shadow creeping across a lawn. Boarded-up windows appeared on once cheerful houses, and the hum of community faded into an uneasy quiet. Still, Daniel and Carol clung to their home, determined to weather the changes until the summer when the unseen eyes next door shattered their sense of safety. Their neighbor to the right, Steve, was a recent arrival, a man shrouded in mystery and cloaked in an accent so thick it was nearly impenetrable. He'd moved in less than a year ago, and Daniel could count their conversations on one hand, brief, stilted exchanges that left him with more questions than answers. Steve's house, a looming 2-story structure, had 2 upstairs windows that overlooked Daniel's backyard, stripping away any illusion of privacy. Yet those windows were always dark, the rooms behind them seemingly abandoned, leading Daniel to assume they were unused guest rooms or storage spaces. He never gave them much thought until that fateful summer day. It was a blistering afternoon, the kind where the air shimmered with heat. Sam and Robbie were splashing in their inflatable pool, their laughter a bright counterpoint to the oppressive humidity. Daniel, drenched in sweat, was trimming hedges near the detached garage when a flicker of movement caught his eye. He glanced up at Steve's house, and for a fleeting moment, less than a heartbeat, he saw Steve standing at one of those perpetually dark windows. The man's face was unreadable, his eyes fixed on the backyard where the twins played. Before Daniel could process the sight, Steve turned and vanished into the shadows of his home. A chill ran down Daniel's spine, despite the sweltering heat. It was odd, unsettling, but he brushed it off as a trick of the mind. Neighbors glance out windows all the time, don't they? As dusk painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, the twins begged to return to the pool. Carol was in the kitchen, the clatter of pots and pans mingling with the aroma of roasting chicken, while Daniel kept an eye on the kids from the patio. The backyard was alive with the sounds of summer, crickets chirping, water splashing, the twins' giggles, until abruptly the laughter stopped. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He looked up to see Robbie sprinting toward the house, his small face pale with fear. "Dad, there's a flashing light," he gasped, pointing toward Steve's house. "From that window." Daniel followed Robbie into the backyard, his pulse quickening. The boy pointed to the same upstairs window where he'd seen Steve earlier. "It was like a camera flash," Robbie said, his voice trembling. Sam nodded vigorously, her eyes wide. "It kept flashing, Dad, over and over." Daniel's stomach churned. A camera flash? The implication was too horrific to entertain, yet it burrowed into his mind like a parasite. He ushered the twins inside, helping them dry off as he fought to keep his voice steady. In the kitchen, he relayed the incident to Carol, whose face drained of color. "You need to go over there," she said, her voice low but firm. "Now!" Daniel's footsteps echoed on the pavement as he approached Steve's front door. The house loomed over him, its windows like unblinking eyes. He knocked, then rang the bell, each sound swallowed by the oppressive silence. Steve's car sat in the driveway, a silent sentinel, yet no one answered. After several attempts, Daniel returned home, his unease growing. Carol's eyes burned with anger and fear. "He's avoiding you," she said. "That makes it worse." Weeks passed, each day tinged with a growing sense of dread. Daniel and Carol kept the twins indoors, their once joyful backyard now a forbidden zone. Then one night, as they lay in bed, a faint creak pierced the stillness, the sound of their side gate being opened and closed. Carol's grip tightened on Daniel's arm. "Go check," she whispered. Heart pounding, Daniel slipped outside, flipping on every light as he scanned the backyard. Nothing. No one. But as he approached the fence separating their property from Steve's, he noticed the glow of lights in Steve's backyard. Steeling himself, he peered over the fence, and nearly jumped out of his skin. Steve stood there inches from the fence, his face a mask of irritation. "Need something?" he asked, his voice clipped. Daniel stammered, asking if Steve had seen anyone sneaking through their yard. Steve shook his head curtly. Emboldened by fear, Daniel pressed further. "The kids saw flashes from your window. They think someone was taking pictures of them." Steve's reaction was explosive, his face contorting with outrage. "You accuse me of that?" he shouted, his accent thickening. "Get out of here!" Daniel apologized, retreating to his house. But Carol was unconvinced. "He's lying," she said, her voice trembling. "I know it." The final straw came in the dead of night, weeks later. Daniel and Carol were jolted awake by the sound of their twins screaming. Daniel tore downstairs to their room, finding Robbie sobbing and Sam clutching her brother in terror. "There was someone outside," Robbie cried. "A flash from the window, like a camera." Daniel's blood ran cold. He gathered the twins and brought them to the master bedroom, where Carol held them close. As the house fell silent, Daniel crept to the window, peering across at Steve's darkened home. And there, in the same upstairs window, he saw him. Steve staring back, his face half hidden in shadow. Fury overtook fear. Daniel stormed outside, pounding on Steve's door, ringing the bell until his finger ached. No answer. He called the police, filing a report to document the incidents, hoping it would prompt action if others came forward. But Steve seemed to vanish. Daniel staked out the front yard, watching for any sign of him. But the man was a ghost. Within a month, Daniel and Carol made the agonizing decision to move. They found a new home in a nearby town, a place where the twins could play without fear, where the windows of strangers didn't loom over their lives. Yet even in their new sanctuary, the memory of those unseen eyes lingered, a haunting reminder of the danger that had once lived next door. Story 2. The Apartment's Midnight Intruders. Lila was 19, a college freshman chasing dreams in a bustling student city where frat houses and late-night parties were as common as textbooks. She shared a cramped apartment with two other women, Mia and Sophie, in a building that was more utilitarian than charming. The corridors buzzed with foot traffic, and the apartment's windows faced the hallway, offering little privacy unless the blinds were drawn tight. But Lila, perpetually buried in her studies, barely noticed the building's flaws. Her roommates were kind, the neighbors friendly, and the chaos of college life was a thrilling backdrop to her new chapter. That is, until the night the noises began. It was a Thursday, the air thick with the promise of a weekend. Lila was winding down, her phone playing a random video as she drifted toward sleep. The faint strains of pop music, nostalgic hits from the early 2000s, filtered through her window, a common occurrence in a city where parties never slept. She paid it no mind, assuming it was just another frat house revelry. But as her eyes grew heavy, a new sound pierced the haze of her drowsiness, the unmistakable whine of a drill. Lila froze, her heart stuttering. She paused the video on her phone, straining to listen. The drilling was real, insistent and close. Too close. It was nearly 11 p.m., far too late for any legitimate construction. She rose, padding through the apartment, her bare feet cold against the linoleum. The sound grew louder near her bedroom window, a relentless mechanical hum punctuated by bursts of music. Peering through the blinds, she traced the noise to the neighboring apartment, a unit she knew to be vacant. Confusion gave way to unease. Who was in there, and why were they working in the dead of night? Lila tried to rationalize it. Perhaps a new tenant had moved in, and the landlord had ordered last-minute repairs. But the timing felt wrong, the secrecy unsettling. She texted a friend, venting about the noise, even sending a shaky video of the window where the drilling and music emanated. "Call the cops," her friend urged. "This isn't normal." But Lila, exhausted and craving sleep, hesitated. She crawled back into bed, pulling the covers over her head, willing the noise to stop. It didn't. By 1 a.m., the drilling had given way to hammering, each strike a jolt to her fraying nerves. Lila's patience snapped. She threw on a robe, her anger outweighing her fear, and marched into the corridor. The neighboring apartment's window was open, just above a short flight of stairs. She descended a few steps, steeling herself to confront whoever was responsible. But as she reached the window, her courage faltered. 4 men stood inside the dimly lit room, their silhouettes stark against the flickering light of a bare bulb. They were older, 30s or 40s, Lila guessed, their faces weathered and hard. Tools were scattered across the floor, and a radio blared the same pop songs that had lulled her earlier. The men froze, their eyes locking onto her, and the sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the tinny music. Lila's mouth went dry. There was something predatory in their gazes, a quiet menace that made her skin crawl. Summoning her voice, she spoke, her words trembling but firm. "Excuse me, it's really late, and people here have early classes or work. Could you please do this another time?" The men didn't respond immediately. 2 of them stepped closer to the window, towering over her. They were sweaty, their clothes stained, and one clutched a heavy hammer that gleamed in the dim light. Their smiles were slow, twisted, and utterly devoid of warmth. Lila's heart pounded, her instincts screaming at her to run. She backed away, her eyes never leaving theirs, each step deliberate as she retreated up the stairs. The men watched, unblinking, their smiles widening. As soon as she was out of sight, she bolted for her apartment, slamming the door and locking it with trembling hands. Inside, the silence was oppressive. The drilling had stopped, the music silenced, as if her confrontation had flipped a switch. But the absence of noise was worse. It felt like the calm before a storm. Lila checked her phone. Mia was out of town, and Sophie hadn't responded to her texts, likely asleep. She crawled into bed, her mind racing. Who were those men? How did they have access to a vacant apartment? And why had they looked at her like that? Sleep came fitfully, her dreams haunted by leering faces and the glint of that hammer. She awoke at 3:30 a.m., the apartment cloaked in an unnatural stillness. No drilling, no music, no footsteps in the corridor. The silence was suffocating, pressing against her like a physical weight. She lay frozen, convinced that someone was outside her window, watching, waiting. Her imagination conjured the men from the apartment, their predatory smiles now inches from her glass. She didn't dare check, didn't dare move, until dawn broke and the world felt marginally safer. The next morning, Lila passed the neighboring apartment's window on her way out. It was closed, the room beyond dark and empty, as if the previous night had been a fever dream. She asked Sophie, who confirmed she'd heard the noises too, waking multiple times but paralyzed by sleep. The confirmation was both a relief and a fresh source of dread. Lila considered reporting the incident to the landlord or police, but fear of retaliation kept her silent. A week passed without further disturbances, but the memory of those men lingered, a shadow that followed her through the corridors. She began closing her blinds religiously, avoiding the window at night, and praying that the intruders were gone for good. Yet deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to return. Story 3. The Watchers Across the Fence. In a quiet corner of Long Island, where suburban streets wound through patches of woods and water basins, Ethan and his girlfriend Sarah had found their slice of paradise. Their rented house was small but perfect, a cozy haven for 2 with a decent backyard, and a street so tranquil it felt like a world apart. On one side, a drainage basin swallowed by trees offered natural privacy. On the other, their neighbors Kyle and his wife, an older couple in their 60s, kept to themselves. Across the street, a dense thicket of woods shielded them from prying eyes. For Ethan and Sarah, who craved solitude, the house was a dream, until the watchers across the fence turned it into a nightmare. The trouble began in the fall, as the leaves turned crimson and gold. Ethan and Sarah spent weekends raking the yard, their breath visible in the crisp air. At first, they barely noticed the house directly behind theirs, separated by a low fence and partially obscured by bushes. But as the days grew shorter, Ethan began to feel a prickle of unease whenever he worked in the backyard. He'd glance up, almost instinctively, and there they were. A middle-aged man and woman, standing at the upstairs window of the house behind them, staring down with unblinking intensity. At first, Ethan dismissed it as curiosity, new neighbors perhaps. intrigued by the young couple next door. But the staring persisted, day after day, unrelenting. The couple never waved, never smiled, just watched, their faces blank but their eyes sharp. Sarah noticed it too, her discomfort growing with each encounter. "It's like they're studying us," she whispered one evening, her voice tight. Ethan tried to laugh it off, but the weight of those gazes was impossible to ignore. The fall cleanup became a test of endurance. Sarah refused to go into the backyard alone, her unease bordering on fear. Ethan, determined to reclaim their space, continued raking, but the watcher's presence was a constant pressure, like a storm cloud hovering just out of sight. One foggy afternoon, as he swept leaves into piles, he looked up to find the couple at the window again, their silhouettes stark against the glass. Fed up, he raised a hand and waved, forcing a smile. He held the gesture, waiting for a response. A wave, a nod, anything. But the couple remained motionless, their eyes locked on him, their stillness unnerving. Ethan's smile faltered. He turned back to his rake, his heart pounding, and when he stole a glance a few minutes later, they were still there, unchanged. That night over dinner, Sarah proposed a plan. "Let's go introduce ourselves," she said. "Maybe they're just shy. If we meet them, it might break the tension." Ethan was skeptical, the memory of their blank stares too vivid, but he agreed. The next day, they walked around the block to the house, the fog clinging to the ground like a shroud. The house was older, its paint peeling, its windows dark. Ethan rang the bell, his stomach twisting as they waited. The door creaked open, but only a sliver, just enough to reveal half a face. The man was young, in his 20s, with a gaunt complexion and eyes that darted nervously. He wasn't one of the watchers, which only deepened Ethan's unease. Sarah introduced them, her voice bright but strained. "We're your neighbors. Just wanted to say hi." The man's response was curt, his tone bordering on hostile. "What do you want?" he asked, his body half hidden behind the door. Ethan mentioned the couple at the window, asking if they were his parents or relatives. The man's expression hardened. "I live alone," he said. "Don't know who you're talking about." The lie was palpable, hanging in the air like smoke. Ethan and Sarah retreated, the man's gaze burning into their backs as they walked away. Back home, Ethan went upstairs to their bedroom, where a window overlooked the neighboring house. He parted the blinds and froze. The couple was there, at their window, staring directly at him. Their faces were expressionless, but their eyes seemed to pierce through the distance, pinning him in place. He slammed the blinds shut, his hands shaking, and joined Sarah downstairs. "We need to block that window," he said. "Plant something. Anything." But it was fall, too late for planting, and the prospect of enduring a winter under that relentless gaze was unbearable. Days passed without incident, but the tension remained. Ethan and Sarah avoided the backyard, keeping the blinds drawn and the lights low. Then one night, a strange sound shattered the quiet, a rhythmic knocking from downstairs. Ethan's heart raced as he told Sarah to stay in bed. He crept downstairs, the knocking growing louder, more insistent. It wasn't coming from the front door, but from the backyard window, a deliberate tap, tap, tap against the glass. The blinds were closed, hiding whatever or whoever was outside. Ethan's hand hovered over the light switch, fear rooting him to the spot. Finally, he flicked on the backyard light, and the knocking stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence. He didn't dare look outside. Instead, he returned to Sarah, claiming he'd scared off the intruder, though he knew it was a lie. They both suspected the watchers were involved, though they had no proof. Weeks later, the couple vanished from the window, their absence almost as unsettling as their presence. But one night, the silence was broken by muffled yells from the house behind them, so loud they carried through closed windows. Ethan and Sarah listened, frozen, as the screams rose and then cut off abruptly. They debated calling the police, but hesitated, unsure of what they'd witnessed. As winter loomed, Ethan and Sarah clung to their home, but the shadow of the watchers lingered. They planned to plant trees in the spring, to build a barrier against the eyes across the fence. Until then, they lived with the unease, the knowledge that something sinister lurked just beyond their property line, waiting for the right moment to reemerge.